If a nation state like North Korea or China are engaging in theft or they're engaging in destruction of property, then the proper response is not tariffs. The proper response, in my opinion, is a national security protocol. Libertarianism has become too intertwined with pacifism. The Gadsden snake has lost its teeth.
Hello, welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who has been in the trenches fighting the good fight for liberty and doing so much more and talking about this on the radio. And I mean, he's just overall a great guy. And it's none other than Austin Petersen. Austin, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Vance. It's great to be here, man. And it's nice to be on your show. You've been a great guest to my show for the last 3 years. And we always appreciate your economic insight. So thanks for letting me come on and be invited to join you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I appreciate that. We always have a good discussion. So I was like, hey, why don't you come on my show as well? And we can talk about everything that we usually talk about and more. So for the audience, let me go ahead and say your bio for you real quick, and then we can jump right into it. So look, Austin Petersen, as it says on his X profile that you can find at AP4, the number 4, Liberty. Go and check him out. But it's a 1776 American. He's a Wake Up America show host. You can find him on Rumble and other places. He's an award-winning broadcaster and a Japanese karate sensei. We might have to get into all this stuff today and a lot more. But let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do all the guests, Austin. Why do you do what you do every day?
Well, I love freedom and I love America, and I love the idea that, that I could be dedicated to a cause that's greater than myself. And I also am very deeply inspired by the founding fathers. This last week, I was in Washington, D.C., and it was Revolutionary War weekend at George Washington's Mount Vernon. And there's something visceral about this experience where when they have these American Revolutionary War reenactments with British redcoats and American patriots out meeting on the floor of the field of battle and the cannons firing right next to each other, and you feel that concussion. I felt like I felt like a child again. Honestly, I was jumping up and down. I was like, I love this so much. So there's just something to me. It's the greatest story ever told. This is unbelievable. Yeah, against the odds for the time. Revolution against a tyrant to build a brand new country that was inspired by the Roman civilization and the ancient Greeks, and to take the greatest ideas at the time of free markets and capitalism and to put that all together to make something that is so unique. I mean, the United States is so different from the rest of the world because we took so many ideas that had been floating around and put them together, and then sort of reversed the ideas about human rights in a way that made America so different from the rest of the world. Because someone asked me when I posted a picture of the Revolutionary War battles, what do I think it is about the American Revolution that still resonates today, or is an important lesson from the revolution today? And when I thought about it for a while, the answer I think is pretty clear. It's that government does not exist to grant rights. It exists to protect our rights. And this is just the opposite of how every other country has set up. They grant a right, and then, which means, of course, that they can take it away. Or they'll have rights that are in conflict with one another. And then who decides which party is going to win in the arbitration if these two rights that are clearly ostensibly written down on a piece of paper as rights, how do we then decide which right should succeed? But the founding fathers took that concept, turned it on its head, gave us this concept of negative rights, that had been worked on and developed by writers and, that had influenced these, the writings of Thomas Jefferson and others, to create a system of government that, created the most powerful, most prosperous nation on earth. So I just find this deeply inspiring. And, they say every guy has to have a hobby. Some men are into they're into World War II. Some are into the Russian Revolution, right, for the communists. And some men are into the Roman Empire, but I'm into the American Revolution. That's what I'm all about. That's my bag. So that's my hobby. I bought a bunch. I bought some bobbleheads, a George Washington bobblehead while I was there. And this is just really nerdy. And speaking about let people prosper, and this is the reason why my daughter's only going to get 2 dolls instead of 11 this year for Christmas. Not because of the tariffs, but because I literally spent $68 on a pewter figurine. I don't know if you can see this, but it's a pewter figurine
I can see it.
Of an American Revolutionary War soldier. So I feel bad, but she's 1 year old. She'll be 1 year old, so she won't even know about why she's only getting $2 this year.
I love it, man. But she'll know that her dad loves history and loves the American Revolution. Come on.
Yeah. So there you go.
Austin, I also wanted to give you an opportunity to tell that story, though, from yesterday or from this weekend about the flag. And you're at a history museum. Come on, man.
This was really wild, Vance. And this is kind of like this saga began when I started the tour last week, was to go to the U.S. Capitol to meet with my congressman and to tour the Capitol. We went to the Jefferson Memorial, and I created, I used AI to create a Thomas Jefferson that would talk to us and become kind of like a tour guide himself. So AI took on his personality traits and talk. We got to speak to him as if Thomas was really with us at the memorial. So, I do this because, you make a little bit of money on things like this, but for me, it's really more about the civic engagement, right? I definitely earned every dollar that I got from this because we walked so much, but I wanted to teach people. I wanted to teach people about the system of government. I wanted to teach people about how to contact their congressman and to know that they have a right to meet with their congressman and to go to DC and to talk to them and to ask them questions. And I even gave my congressman a hard time about tariffs. Even though I know him personally and I like him, but I wanted to show people, how to have some courage, right? How to be brave and how to push for the ideas that they stand up for what they believe in. So when we got to the U.S. History Museum, the American History Museum of the Smithsonian, I wasn't even thinking about it. I guess, Vance, probably the reason I really got in trouble, you'll find out here in just a moment, but it wasn't the flag I was waving. It was probably had something more to do with the hat that I was wearing, but I'll get to that in just a second. So we're going through the museum and I'm telling people, we got to go this way or we got to go that way. Right. So I'm not like, all over the place. I'm not like making a demonstration or something. I'm just like, here's where our group is, this was the actual flag, right. That I have there. But at one point, we're at the stage of the museum where we're outside the First Lady's exhibit, and a guard approached me and said that I needed to put the flag away, that I have to furl the flag and put it away because I cannot have it out on display the flag at the museum. And I said, I was confused for just a moment. I thought, maybe this, I assumed that she knew what she was talking about and that's what the policy was. So I go, is it just this flag or is it any flag? And she goes, some people might find it offensive. And I was like, and I just thought about it for a second. And I'm there with my daughter, 9 months old, and my wife, and I've got 24 people who are responsible for. I can't just flip out in front of everybody. I'm responsible for all these people. If it was just me, I probably would have made a scene and made a stink or something. But I was just like, okay. So, no problem. Furled the flag, took a picture of it, told the story, posted it on Twitter, blew up, right? And then the Smithsonian called me later to apologize and say that is not the policy, that you are allowed to carry these things. They sell flags in the gift shop. It is the museum where Francis Scott Key's Star Spangled Banner is on display to the public there at that Smithsonian Museum. So either the guard lied or they didn't do their training correctly or listen during their training correctly. But here's what I think happened, Vance. I forgot that I was wearing my Elon Musk dark MAGA hat. And so my guess is that it wasn't the flag that they were very offended by. Now, I'm sure that plenty of them were offended by the flag. I'm sure that plenty of the woke left don't want to see a patriotic American male, with waving a flag. But the worst, the real crime was that I had a Make America Great Again dark MAGA hat on. My guess, Vance, my guess.
Wow, man. Well, I'm glad they at least called you and acknowledged that this was a problem, but still, it's just ridiculous. That's kind of the way that we're in the world right now, is that there's always this uncivility that's going on, the back and forth from a hat or from a flag or whatever else, without us as Americans being like, you know what? We appreciate our country. We appreciate where we've come from. And a big part of that is the flag and in making sure that you have that American pride that's there. It's just, that's messed up, man. I'm sorry you had to go through that with all the people there and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, they asked me what I wanted, right? And I didn't want to I imagine that somebody else who wasn't thinking straight may have been like, well, give me something from the museum, or give me, I don't know, or fire that person or something like that. But I just said, I want to make sure that this never happens again. That's what I want to make sure is that nobody ever has to happen. Because you know what I found out? Somebody else contacted me and said that the exact same thing happened to them, that they had an American flag that was in the museum that was just like this one. And they were told that they have to keep it stowed away because they said, I don't know this person, but they said that the person at the museum declared that it was propaganda. Which, a lot of libertarians, and, I consider myself a member of the Republican Party, but an ideological libertarian. Yeah. A lot of libertarians are like, well, why, you just are love the flags. You love flags are so stupid. Why do you stand for the flag? Nationalism is so dumb. But, this is the symbol that unites all 50 states. The people don't realize the amount of sacrifice and the strength that's symbolized in the unity of 50 independent nations, the greatness of the United States encapsulated in a single symbol. It's like if somebody were to disrespect the cross in some ways, which is not to say that, the United States is a religion and shouldn't be treated like one in some ways, but like there should be a reverence sometimes for symbols that people, and this is a symbol that people rallied to and were killed. Right, people like they lost their lives trying to protect, that flew over Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. So it's I really don't appreciate the cultural vandalism that goes on today, whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's people saying, Winston Churchill was the chief bad guy of World War II. I think Western civilization and its symbols deserve to be protected. Here I have my Winston Churchill with the little rubber ducky. You can see here he's got his little victory symbol there. But I mean, this is there to remind us of these symbols of Western civilization, of which the American flag and, well, maybe not a rubber ducky, but Winston Churchill represent Western civilization, which is what I defend.
Yes, definitely. Austin, what got you on this path? Because I mean, you're big into free markets, and I think you're into the Austrian School of Economics and some other things, and you're on the revolution and freedom. Were there certain books or studies or things that you did growing up that got you to where you are today that brought that together? Or how would you explain it?
I would really trace it back to this guy right here. This is not just a plug for my coffee brand. But I mean, Thomas Jefferson, I will never forget being a little boy. I couldn't have been maybe 5 or 6 years old. And my mom and dad take us to Washington, D.C., and we visit the Jefferson Memorial. And I was a writer. I've always been a writer. And so learning about Thomas Jefferson was deeply inspiring to me because he was a writer and he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And I've just thought that ever since from a young age, I was inspired by Thomas Jefferson because I felt like he was the founding father who I was most like. As I got older, I started to actually like Thomas Paine a little bit more. But, Thomas Jefferson is a man after my own heart in many ways. And then I wasn't really politically active until 2007 when I was introduced to Congressman Ron Paul. And so Ron Paul, I had read Ayn Rand to that point, so I considered myself something of a capitalist. I've never been a leftist or a Democrat, right? The closest thing to a liberal, you might say, is a classical liberal. But even then, I still still, I kind of think of like Governor Gary Johnson as like a classical liberal. And then I'm more like close towards like minarchism, a little bit closer to anarchism, but not quite anarchism. But Ron Paul is the one who got me to actually like get out in the streets, take action, fight for my liberty and for the liberty of my fellow citizens. And, ever since then, I've just been deeply passionate about these ideas. And I think I'm good at it. And so when you find your niche, when you find something that you're really good at, when you feel like you've found your lane, you should stick to it. And that's what I've been doing. Ever since 20 years, I've been, advocating for these ideas.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love it. And you've been doing a lot of big things. I mean, I've seen we've been at different events together or talking on your show and you've changed different shows along the way and you ran for office and, there's a lot of big things that are happening. And of course you have your first child now. And so you can see the different dynamics of what that means for you and your wife, Stephanie, and the family and everything. And, there's just so many different factors that are going on. And I wonder, whenever you're thinking at night and you're talking on your show and everything else, what are some of the big things that are kind of like, this is a big issue right now that I need to put more emphasis on and things of that nature. Where's your head been at lately, Austin?
Well, there's a lot of things that, that I don't know a lot about. And I try to refrain from commenting on those things. I try not to weigh in. I may have opinions on certain topics, but if I don't have a background in it or a real strong base of knowledge, I try to avoid it, even though I do consider myself something of a generalist when I'm talking about news. But one thing that I'm really passionate about is a subject that a lot of people find boring, but I'm very deeply interested in, which is international trade. And this this goes back to my experience working at an institute called the Atlas Foundation, which is dedicated to educating people about international trade. And it's kind of, it's one of those subjects where when I talk to people about it, they're like, oh, why are you so interested in tariffs and markets and trade and the World Trade Organization and different institutions like this? Well, because it's, where do you think that the coffee comes from? Right. The Columbia, they don't make this in the United States other than in Hawaii. And those beans are quite expensive and not really the best beans that are out there. The best beans, in my opinion, come from Colombia, and they come from they come from South America. So how we get our daily coffee is due to international trade, and so I speak out very strongly against tariffs because I think that one of the things that really makes America great is that this system of international trade has made us wealthy. And there's so many economic fallacies that I think can be easily debunked, even by somebody like myself, who I'm not a genius. I could never be an economist. And there, I only have certain skills that I can bring to this, which is just my ability to take big ideas and sort of break them down and speak them in a way that I think people can find accessible, right? Introduce people to these ideas, which many of these ideas are even, that I tussle with are even beyond me. And I make mistakes sometimes on these things, and I try and acknowledge what I do. But I really just am very passionate about free trade because this standard of living that Americans enjoy is due to free trade. And if somebody like me, who's not an economist, who's not a genius when it comes to trade or mathematics and econometrics and things like that, if someone like me can understand the basics of these concepts, can understand Econ 101 about marginal utility and the ability to do what you do best and trade for the rest. These concepts, if I can understand them, then I think more people could understand these too if they were just introduced to them. But like me, most people never get into an Econ 101 class. And so for me, I was very lucky because I was able to go to a week-long intensive advanced Austrian economics class with the Foundation for Economic Education. So, I mean, I've always been a really big history buff, but it really helped me to understand the economic history of the 20th century, to learn it from some of the greatest Austrian, Israel Kirzner And I forget his last name, but forgetting his last name. You know who I'm talking about, though? Mario Rizzo, yep. Israel Kirzner, teaching me the economic history of the 20th century. Fascinating. And it helped me to sort of to put together, to bind the gaps in my knowledge between the events that happen and how the economic situations impact the outcome of them. So, like, for example, one of the lesser understood concepts of World War II is how the economics impacted why Japan attacked the United States, or the economics of why was Hitler so paranoid that he felt the need to invade his neighbors. It wasn't just the Lebensraum concept. It wasn't just that, he wanted to have more space for his own people, but it was also because he felt a strong sense of economic anxiety because he was worried. That if because Germany was an industrial nation, not an agricultural one, he was worried that if other countries stopped trading with Germany and if they for some reason were to embargo Germany, they would not have the means to be able to feed their people. So he embarked on this conquest in part to have access to the grain fields of Eastern Europe and to be able to feed his people. But I mean, if he had just understood economics 101, do what you do best and trade for the rest, everybody would have wanted German technology. Everybody would have been happy to trade grain for German-made watches, German cars. They still are trading for German cars and machinery. But it was his economic illiteracy and his bigotry, which contributed to the tension between himself, the conflict between nations. Which is not to say that it was all economic reasons, of course. But but if you understand that the reason that the Japanese continued is because they had an economic situation that was a chicken meets the egg, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, where every time they would take a territory, they would then have to govern it, feed it, come up with the money, like monetize it, build it up. And so then how would they do it? Well, they'd say, okay, well, let's just take another territory and then we'll use the resources from that territory until finally they, like Risk, they had stretched themselves too far and their empire collapsed. Yeah. And the United States and a couple of nuclear weapons helped with that, of course. But I mean, it's the lack of economic understanding, because the more top down that you try and run an economy, the more that the commanding heights of the economy are controlled by very, very few people or institutions, the more wobbly the whole system gets, versus a bottom-up system like the Hayekian system that we advocate. These are concepts. Again, I'm not a genius, right? I'm not like the smartest guy in the world. But if you paid attention in history class enough, and if you spend a little bit of time reading some of Hayek and reading maybe a little Israel Kirzner or Mario Rizzo, if you listen to the podcast on the weekend, you'll realize that free markets and limited government, classical Republican libertarianism, these concepts make sense and they are effective and they do work. It's not like communists where they say real communism has been tried. Free markets, to a great extent, have been tried and they've been proven, versus the opposite. It's a shame that more people don't recognize it. But I blame that on a lack of education.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great points there. And I agree with you. And I wonder too, it seems like a lot of this discussion about trade and tariffs and protectionism and everything else, my argument on that, Austin, is that there's a lot of bad assumptions that get us to that place. So, for example, some will say that we've hollowed out the Rust Belt, or the Rust Belt was hollowed out because of international trade. A lot of those businesses went to China and other places. But whenever I look at the history, speaking of history, and the evidence and the economics of it, there was more to the story. One thing that I proposed out there is that it was also a lot of bad policies by the Rust Belt, by those states. Ohio, West Virginia, a lot of them had high spending, high taxes, high regulations. They had forced union dues that put up higher minimum wages and other things that made it very costly to doing business, along with what the federal government was doing, by the way. And what did that do? People move with their feet. Incentives matter. Economics, one of the simple things, incentives matter. And instead of doing more production in the Rust Belt, they started moving to the Sun Belt, to Texas, where I live, to Florida, to other places. So it wasn't even across country to another country first. It was later when that started to go to Mexico, to China, and other places, because you really saw the share of manufacturing employment started to fall back in the 1950s and 1960s. It wasn't after NAFTA in 1992 or WTO when China joined the WTO in 2001. It was well before all that when this trend started. And oh, by the way, usually when you see countries that develop and become developed, they usually move away from manufacturing to service sector economies and other things. Now, I think we were pushed into that faster, Austin, because of the bad policies that we had here. But now it's kind of easy scapegoat to blame Mexico, to blame China. And some businesses certainly moved over in that direction. But from my view, Austin, I think we should be doing more here versus trying to use tariffs and other things. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I like your concept about, like, the feds can't rebuild what the states have destroyed. Right? We're always talking about bringing, labor and jobs back to the states, but the states have made it impossible for us to manufacture. I saw that the CEO of Mattel was talking about the manufacture of toys and how the manufacture of toys will continue to be done overseas because it still makes more economic sense for them to make it overseas than to make it here in the United States. And one of the things that I think people really don't appreciate is just how fragile supply chains can be. And then when a supply, because when people invest, right, when you make an investment, you're thinking about, you're making a conservative decision about what's going to happen 3 to 5 to 10 to 15 years from now. Most people they like to think of the stock market like it is a casino, because there are people who are day traders who go in, go out same day. But for the most part, most people are trying to actually earn a return on their investment, not just trying to get rich quick. They're trying to think about what can we do to invest now for 3 to 5 to 10 years down the. If you've never owned a business and had to invest in a business, I could tell you right away, you don't make a profit right away. As a matter of fact, you usually start in the hole. No. You usually start in the hole and you're negative, and you've got to work 2, 3, 5 years before you start to see it. You may dig out. And the thing is, you may never make a profit. You may never make a profit. Yeah. At the end of the day, everybody may lose everything. Most businesses don't, right? Yeah. Yeah, most businesses don't. They don't make a profit. So they don't realize that how fragile supply chains can be. And when they go away, sometimes they never come back, because if a business owner says, well, I don't know, the country seems to have taken hold of this new populism that is very anti-trade and that is very anti-market. Yeah. And therefore, we may make a little bit less but by investing in Canada versus the United States in the next 3 to 5 years to 7 years. But frankly, the fact that it's stability, the stability is there, it might be a safer bet. And I'll use an example from my streaming service. So when I stream my Wake Up America show, I have to have fast internet. Sometimes I don't have fast internet, and when I don't have fast internet, I suffer because I'm not able to push as much information, little blocks of information, through the internet as quickly as I can. And that is why it's important for me to have a very fast upload speed. An upload speed for me is way more important than a download speed, right? So if I have two different connections, because supply chains, right? Supply of internet. If I have two different connections and one is very fast, right? But it tends to be more erratic versus one that is slower, but gives me a much more steady speed. I choose the slower speeds because if it's steady, then I know for sure what I'll be able to do and accomplish within that 2-hour time period. Take that and apply that now to investing. If I look at a country that might provide high returns, okay, well, that's great, but I could also lose everything, and everything is jumbled. So a lot of investors who tend to be more conservative are going to be the type of people who are going to say, let's invest in a smaller market that's going to give us a little bit more steady of an income flow, because we need to be a little bit more conservative now, especially the way that inflation is affecting the marketplace, the economies around the world. So all of that just to explain to people that stability is important. I mean, I think Ludwig von Mises wrote the book. It was called Planned Chaos. So like markets have an anarchic effect, right? There is a chaos somewhat to the market. But I think, Hayek came in and with his concept of spontaneous order and essentially alluded to the fact that within this chaos, that order emerges spontaneously and naturally as citizens come together to create that order. And that's really what the government needs to allow us to do, because I think that, like, for example, international trade, it looks like chaos. It looks crazy. You look at all the ships and the airplanes, and they're flying in every direction. And if you look at that from that macro perspective, it's going to blow your mind. You're going to think to yourself, "This is wow, this is crazy. It's too much." We're seeing it's not stable. We need to force stability on it. But if you come in, you look on the micro level, you will see orderly supplies of crates making their way on shipping container ships across the ocean on a regular schedule, and there's no government telling them when and where to, how much to move or ship or all that stuff. So, I mean, out of chaos, if you look at it on a micro level, is order. And that comes naturally and it comes spontaneously, and we should allow it to be as such and not try and think that from the top down, from the commanding heights, that we can determine, well, you only need to see 3 Japanese movies this month, and we're going to have we're going to force China to buy 10 of our movies, and then we're going to see 1 South Korean film this month, and that's it. No more South Korean movies. It's ridiculous.
It is. Those are great examples too, by the way. Yeah, see, you could be an economist. You're doing this all the time.
No, see, economists aren't good at selling their ideas. I am good at selling ideas.
That's true.
So that's the difference,
There you go, man. Yeah, it's also interesting to me, sticking with this kind of trade and manufacturing for a little bit longer, is that, there's kind of this nostalgia that people want to work in manufacturing. And I'm not so sure that Americans want to work in manufacturing. Maybe some of them do, but it's almost like they're putting manufacturing over everything else and saying we want to force people to go back into factories, when many people may not want to do that. And by the way, these are all voluntary transactions that are happening between different countries. Now, you got the Communist Party and that sort of thing over in China, and that causes some conflict and some tension there. But one of the concerns that I have too, Austin, is that trade also brings about peace. And the more that we isolate and don't trade with other countries, I'm worried about the tension that that's going to create. And by the way, whenever we were trading with China for the last 40, 50 years, when they really started opening up back in 1978, that created a situation where they learned about our republic. They learned about capitalism. And many of those people that were there in China actually kind of fell in love with that. As we saw the expansion of that happening, the more that we isolate ourselves and don't trade with China, what I'm worried about is that the people will never understand what capitalism is,
I agree.
What a republic is, and what freedom could really be. And I'm really concerned about that. But what do you think about that, Austin?
Well, there is what is right and what is true and what is good, and then there is also what is possible. I was reading Otto von Bismarck, and he said that politics is the art of the possible, the art of the next best. So, for example, if I want as much international free trade as possible, from a political perspective, even Adam Smith, I think, said that there are, in regards to tariffs, he was very much opposed to them, but he did grant an exception for like national security. Now, in that situation, I would say, okay, well, then that means that if there does need to be some form of belligerence against China, and China absolutely deserves to be punished for their role in the pandemic, then if I was a congressman and I had to make a compromise to get a better deal to make sure we're not tariffing Korea and Japan and all these other countries and things like that, then that might be a compromise that I'd be willing to make. Not because I think it's the right thing to do. I definitely don't. I don't think you should punish American citizens for what China did, which is essentially what these tariffs are. But we also need to have a conversation about national security. And I actually think, Vance, and this is something that I really like to pound the pavement with, because I think it's an extremely unpopular opinion in libertarian circles, but that we actually need a very powerful, very strong national security, national defense. That the United States does need a powerful military, and that the role of the United States Navy is literally, they were founded to protect American merchant shipping. So the question, in the battle of ideas between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson in regards to, would I like to see American merchant shipping a little bit more muscular with maybe cannons defending themselves from pirates? Sure. Are there international treaties that prevent them from doing so? Yeah, there are. They can't just roll in. You can't just roll into Helsinki or whatever port in Norway and think that you can have a cannon pointed at the port. You can't. Only military, only flagged military vessels can do things like that, and only with permission of that country or with however it goes through NATO. But the question is it the proper role of the U.S. Navy to protect American merchant shipping around the world? Yeah, I do. I think that is the proper role of the U.S. Navy is to protect. I think that if we're paying taxes for the U.S. military, that part of the thing is to have a military that can protect American citizens, not just in regards to our merchant shipping, but also if they're kidnapped overseas to conduct the diplomacy that's necessary, or perhaps to send in SEAL Team 6. And all of this to work, all of this to work my way back to suggest that instead of tariffing Americans for Chinese goods, we should be using the military to engage in counter-espionage, because China does steal our intellectual property, no matter how you feel about it, right? That's a question, right? They do engage in espionage. They do engage in cyber attacks and hacks of our critical infrastructure. Right? These are national security questions. And I don't think that, policymakers, they actually prefer to use tariffs rather than the military, because tariffs are a less violent method for dealing with the national security questions. But I prefer the more violent means to deal with violence. If you're engaging, if a nation state like North Korea or China are engaging in theft, or they're engaging in destruction of property, then the proper response is not tariffs. The proper response, in my opinion, is a national security protocol. It's a national security question. This is not popular in libertarian circles. But I think that the issue is that libertarianism has become too intertwined with pacifism, and the Gadsden snake has lost its teeth.
That's right. No, I think that's well put, Austin. I mean, as you know, I'm more libertarian, classical liberal, and but I do believe in strong national defense. I think that's one of the key core tenets of our federal government, is to provide national defense, to provide a justice system, and to provide maybe a few public goods, although I'm skeptical about that. But even then, that would only be about a government about $1.5 trillion compared to the $6.8 trillion we're spending today at the federal level. So we could get things a lot smaller at the federal level, taxes and everything else, and then we would have more freedom and liberty to do the things that we want to do. And so I'm also concerned about that. And I think you're right. I mean, tariffs aren't a good tool. I don't think they're a good negotiating tool. That's just me. I think there are other mechanisms that you can use, but I also think it's not a good tool to use for national security issues either. To your point, is that there's a lot of other tools that we should be using in our belt. We could probably go on about that all day, but I did want to get at least some of your insights, man, about when you were running for office and getting into politics and different things. Because I know that can have, it's a huge burden. Not everybody wants to go do that, but you did, Austin. You went through all that. What were some of the insights that you learned and some of the things that you'd want to share?
Well, some of the insights that I've learned are rather depressing, of course, and some of the things are actually quite interesting. But what I would say is, one of the more depressing things, I'll start with the bad things and we'll work our way over to the good things. One of the bad things that you learn is you think people want you to introduce yourself to them, go to events, shake their hands, earn their vote, ask for their vote, do that retail politicking, knock on doors and all that kind of stuff. And you do need people to knock on doors. But there's this strange psychological thing. America does not have an aristocracy. We don't have a royalty, but we do have, in some ways kind of have a caste. And Americans, and it's a caste of celebrity. And there is something very strange about the desire for Americans, many of them, not all of us, but many of us want to believe that the people who govern us are like gods, that they are celebrities, that they are untouchable. I mean, wouldn't you want to think, if you think about it, it makes sense. Wouldn't you want the person who represents you to be amazing and to be brilliant, to be great at everything and be all this kind of stuff, rather than be a schlub or a schmo just like you, right? Like nobody, would you want to send to Washington, D.C. some regular guy? That is the whole concept of sending to D.C. somebody who you want to have a beer with or all this kind of stuff. That is one of the biggest lies in all of politics. People, there's all this populism that we get in the United States right now, but it's so phony because people love celebrity. And if you make yourself too familiar with them, do you know what familiarity breeds? Contempt. Contempt.
Yeah. Right.
Familiarity breeds contempt. So the more people get to know you, the less they like you. But if you're running for because they see your flaws, right? But if you're running for office, especially high office, unfortunately, if I were to do it again, I would not go to any town hall meetings. I would not participate in any debates other than ones that I absolutely have to. I would not spend any money on flyers or things like that other than what was necessary to go. I'd let the super PAC do all that stuff. But what I would do is I would take every penny that I have and I would run commercials on Fox News at 5 p.m. 5 days a week. That's all I would do. I would never, ever I might give public speeches if there's a big enough venue, but only if it had enough people, because then it would be a waste of my time. The sad reality, you think, and you'll see like pictures of people like, oh, I met Austin at an event. He earned my vote. And that's great. And you took the picture and you pounded the pavement. You did retail politicking. It does not work. It does not work. Not for, I mean, maybe it'll work for like a town council where you've got like 300 to 500 votes or something like that. That's different. But if you're going to run for Congress, or if you're going to run for anything where like you've got like tens to hundreds of thousands of votes, then your money is better spent on television commercials or radio commercials that play saturation night and day. And if you get too familiar with people, they will have contempt for you. Your job is to make yourself appear like an untouchable god, because people believe it. And the only problem is that after a while, the politicians drink their own Kool-Aid and they believe it themselves. And it's like, I always said that if I actually did win elective office at some point on a high enough level, what I would do is I would do what they did. I'm not sure if it's confirmed, but it was believed that back in the days of the Roman Empire, if you won enough battles, then you would have they would throw a parade for you down the streets of Rome. But when they did, they would have one person whose job it was assigned to whisper in your ear, remember, you are human. Remember, you are human. You are not better than everyone else. You are just like everyone else. And it's to counteract that, because, I mean, you see it happen all the time. It goes to their heads. These politicians, how many of them are drinking their own Kool-Aid? Like, I'm sure Nancy Pelosi really believes all of the things that she posts out there about herself. She probably believes that all of that is true, rather than she's a lying, conniving, the alcoholic, inside trader, right? So that was the big sad realization that I had was that people love celebrity, and that's why they call politics Hollywood for ugly people. So so that's what I would say, is that if you see a libertarian out there, Vance, and they're doing their best and they're pounding the pavement, but they're spending a lot of money doing like voter outreach and stuff, tell them, as much as I love you, you know what? I won't even support them. I won't support those people, no matter how well-meaning they are, because you're wasting your time. You need to spend every dime you have going straight to the audience on Fox News at 5 p.m. That's where your money needs to be spent. I don't care how expensive it is. Every penny you only raise $10,000, then you better be spent $10,000 on radio or in your district. So that was a sad realization. The positive realization is that even a losing campaign can have positive consequences, because even though the things that I did not, I didn't become president of the United States at 35 years old. Oh my gosh, is this the end? No, not the end of the world, and also highly unlikely anyway, right? Yeah. I wanted to inspire people, and after the Tea Party, the liberty movement really started to go down. We started to lose momentum. And really, to a large extent, the liberty movement has never recovered. And so I was trying to keep the momentum going. And the things that when people are like, oh, you lost the election, but like there are literally people who exist because they are the children of people who met and fell in love and got married during my campaigns, and that have these beautiful beautiful families. And it may be a small consolation or whatever it is, but to me, it means everything. I've seen, I did bring people together. I actually created families by giving opportunities to people and showing people, to fight for what's right and to stand up against evil, and there are people who have actually campaigned for me that have gone on to run for local elections, and they've won their elections. So there is something to be said for inspiring people when hope is down. And not everybody needs to be a martyr, but people who make sacrifices and run for office and don't necessarily win, they may have secondary or tertiary victories that might come after that may not be seen. The secondary effects can sometimes be quite powerful. And even it's like, Barry Goldwater, right? Giving us Ronald Reagan in a sense. Without Barry Goldwater, there'd be no Ronald Reagan.
That's a great point. Great point. Well, Austin, it's always a pleasure talking with you. I'm sure I'll be on your show again sometime soon as well. Keep up the great work. God bless you and your family. And, where's the best place for people to find you before we go?
I just like it when people follow me over on X at AP for Liberty. If they are interested in my show that you've been on several times, I'm on Rumble and it's the same. Just rumble.com/AP for Liberty. Rumble.com/AP for Liberty. And if people saw my Jeffersonian Java coffee earlier and were like, I want to try that. It is amazing coffee. Stop drinking Starbucks because the people who own Starbucks use the money that you give them to pay to send their employees across state lines to have abortions. So stop giving your money to corporations that hate you and don't stand for your values. Try out my Founding Flavors coffee. And I give a guarantee, if they don't like it, I will buy it back. So it's no risk. Nice. Yeah, go to forlibertyshop.com and buy a box.
And Austin, you have a ton of great stuff, like your shirts. I mean, y'all are always coming out with awesome things. Look at this. We've
got lots of different types of coffee as well. Oh, you know what? I think people would really like your audience, especially if they've got kids. Is our children's? Stephanie and I wrote this children's book, which is based on Calvin Coolidge, and it tells the story of how Calvin Coolidge became president, and it has really beautiful illustrations in there of Calvin Coolidge's life. And we sent one to Amity Schlaze, who she was very much one of the inspirations. Like a lot of people don't know that Calvin Coolidge literally had his own zoo. Like he had a pygmy hippopotamus, and he was a big fan of ice cream. And I sort of explained to kids what is it that made Calvin Coolidge so cool, and it was the moral lesson is that just because you're the boss doesn't mean that you have to be bossy. And Calvin Coolidge was the boss, but he wasn't bossy. And that's why that's why Calvin was the coolest president. You can get a signed copy of that at forlibertyshop.com.
Nice, man. Okay. I'm gonna have to go pick up me a copy as well, because my boys need to read that. Hey, well, Austin, always keep up the great work. Always a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Vance. Have a good one.
Good. For the audience, thank y'all for joining us today. I hope you too enjoyed this discussion. Share with your friends and family, and go out and check out Austin Petersen's work. I'll put all this in the show notes as well. Remember, you can find all this at vanceginn.com or the show notes at Substack at vanceginn.substack.com. Until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.